Hey, welcome to this first video on the beginner's guide to Excel for healthcare analytics. I'm going to go through some introductory material. I'm going to build the on-ramp completely from I've never seen Excel to I can do some of my basic tasks for analytics in Excel to the fullest of its capability. So here is the on-ramp at the very start. It may feel introductory to some, but could be exactly what others need. So let's start just by looking at a welcome to the course and an overview. One note on how to navigate this is to use the hyperlinks, anything that's underlined, to jump around the file. It'll take you to the content that it looks like it will. It'll either bring you back to the index or it will take you to this welcome and course overview, for example. So let's just start at a very high level. What I'm going to attempt to do here and teach in Excel for healthcare analytics is a series dedicated to Microsoft Excel as a tool for use in healthcare analytics. So some of the objectives are to impart an understanding for the fundamentals of Excel, navigating, data entry, basic formulas. Learn how to manage, clean, and analyze healthcare data in Excel. Build confidence in creating pivot tables, charts, and some simple dashboards in Excel. Notice I don't say mastery. Mastery only comes from continued practice and having meaningful use cases for using the tool. I can give you the basics. Mastery is on you. I can tell you about how to get there, but I can't take you all the way. I'll be here to provide an outline, some of the basics, and a whole bunch of great materials and content that you can use for your practice and to get started meaningfully using Excel for healthcare analytics. So a little preview, we'll go through some real basics today. Eventually we'll get into formulas, data cleaning, pivots, and some dashboards. So let's get started. I'm going to head back to the index and go to our first topic, which is the Excel interface itself and getting familiar with that. Just knowing what it is that you're looking at. I've provided a really great resource here that you can reference as you have questions or as you're wondering what these things are. I won't go through it extensively right now because you can access this workbook for yourself, but I will guide you around it and tell you what I've provided. What I've got is some basic terminology to get started understanding this tutorial and others when they're trying to teach you about Excel. So just to start with, what is a workbook versus a worksheet? What I'm working in right now, the overall file is called a workbook. Now I've been navigating to different worksheets by clicking these links. Right now, if you are paying close attention, in the bottom of the tool, you'll see that I am on a tab or a worksheet called Index. When I choose one of these hyperlinks, I'm jumping just to another worksheet. I could also do the same thing just by clicking through here. I just tried to make it a little bit easier for you to navigate through the content by having a couple of hyperlinks. So that's what a workbook is, the overall file, and a worksheet is each of these individual tabs of information that are in them. So now let's start talking about the ribbon. The ribbon is a primary place where you're going to go to make choices about what to change, how to manipulate format, whatever it is you need to do here to the data that you are putting into the file or the text or whatever it is that you're creating. In order to manipulate that, you're going to use the ribbon, one of the tabs of the ribbon. So just overall terminology, what we're talking about is the ribbon, and when I say the home tab or the insert tab or the page layout tab, I'm talking about the different choices across the top of that ribbon that will take you to different options. So each one of these has a related group of options that you can choose about how to manipulate, change the information that you've got in Excel, and those are referred to as tabs. And the buttons in there are called command buttons. So we're going to talk a lot about the ribbon. Let's start with the Home tab. Home tab is where you start by default. It's also probably the place that you spend most of your time, as it's got some basic formatting through the fonts and alignment. It's also got some of the formatting for different data types when you have to format currency, for example, versus a percentage versus a regular number versus text. Some of those options are here for you. Copying and pasting information, which is a common need in Excel, is here as well. They've got some ability to stylize the information, like doing some conditional formatting, a topic we'll cover in detail later. And then you can do things like insert or delete rows and columns. We'll talk about what rows and columns are in Excel in a minute. Also a few other editing options. So that is the Home tab on the ribbon. Now we'll continue to move through each of these next to the Insert tab. The Insert tab, the concept of this grouping of options is when you need to insert something into the workbook, most of the time what you need to do is come to the Insert tab and make a choice. You may want to insert a table of information, insert a pivot table, insert a shape or an icon, and so you see those options here across the ribbon. This is your place to come when you want to put a new element into your workbook. Next, we've got a Page Layout tab. When you need to get very particular or specific about how the page lays out, how it prints, how it is going to be displayed, this is where you want to come, which is the Page Layout tab on the ribbon. There's a lot of different options here. For the most part, the ones on the left are the most meaningful in this page setup when you're going to print the output or prepare the output to be shared, not when you're just working in the file itself. When you're just working in the file itself, some of the options on the right may become meaningful, like if you have shapes and you want to make some of them go in front of the others or be aligned in a certain way. Some of these options are needed, very similar to how you might have used them in other Microsoft products. The next tab over is the Formula tab. This comes in handy as you start using math and referring to other cells within Excel. We're going to look at a little bit of the introductory material on that, but as you get to new opportunities to quantify data and apply math to it in order to get different answers, different understanding of the information, the Formula tab may be really helpful in doing some of those common tasks around formulas or discovering new formulas or building into a new formula or function here in Excel. The library of what's available is here. There's an ability to define names, but I won't get worried about that topic yet. Some auditing, like looking for errors and trying to find out where you went wrong, as well as some of the options in your calculations. Next tab over is one that I spend the probably second most amount of time in, which is the Data tab. It has a number of features, not the least of which is how to access data. Now, we're primarily going to be talking through the use case of inputting data into an Excel file, a workbook, manipulating it, using it to present or create information. But more and more, the way that data is going is that it's so big it doesn't fit into Excel, or Excel isn't the best tool to do the sort of churning and calculation of the information. So sometimes Excel is used to connect out to other data. This Get Data option here in the Data tab of the ribbon is the primary place you come to access data that is sitting somewhere else, like sitting in another file. It's in a database, might be in an Azure environment, the cloud environment from Windows, or your institution may present it into the Power Platform. This is something that your institution would sort of dictate. Usually if someone expects you to access data in these other environments, they should also have the resources to show you how to do so. So don't get hung up on worrying about every detail there. Get to a use case and then dig until you find the person who can show you how to access the data that you need. This Data tab in accessing data, the far left options are very useful to get to external data. Then you see the ability to refresh any data that's here or connections. There are some data type formatting things that you can do. Sort is another common reason I'm coming to this tab is I have a piece of information or a big group or table of information that I want sorted in a particular order or by a couple of factors. Or I need to filter it. It's so big it's tough to see, and I need to identify the data when it meets a certain criteria that I have, that I can use the filter in order to access. Another really common function that I end up using is over here in these data tools, and that is the remove duplicates. Anyone that's spent time working with data has probably come up against the need to get rid of or find any duplicates within their data. This is the option that helps you do that. There's also some ability to forecast and to group some of your columns and rows. So all stuff we can look at later, but this is the place to come when you need to do something, change something about your data. The next tab over is the Review tab. This is for proofreading, which is very important because Excel does not do an active spell check the way that a lot of other tools do. It's very easy to get some big glaring spelling errors in here and to not notice it. You might even find a few in this file because your boy here is dyslexic. So forgive me for that. That is just going to continue to happen. In the review, you may also find an opportunity to lock down some of the content within the workbook. This becomes really important if your data is sensitive, or really important that you keep the integrity of the data in place when you're working with a lot of people, or even if you're trying to protect it from yourself. You may protect the source information and then use the rest of the workbook to maybe reference that information, something like that. A review tab becomes useful. In today's day and age, we're not just using Excel as the desktop application in the way that I'm showing it to you now. Sometimes we'll be using Excel in the online environment through a browser in Excel Online. That is where this comment feature can become really handy. You may be working on a file together with a partner, either over a video call or at different times during the day, and you can leave comments here, even mention people in order to communicate something that doesn't have to go into the worksheet itself, and you can let people know what you're thinking, what you need their input on, how you need them to work with the file. So that's a very great, it's a very good utility with today's sort of connected nature of the data, or of these tools. Next, let's look at this View tab in the ribbon. The View tab is really useful when you need to see something different in how you're interacting with just the visual of this information. I come here really often because I'm somebody who just doesn't like the grid lines. It's a little bit of visual noise that bugs me, and so I turn them back on. You can see it's no big deal. That's the default. That's how most people are used to seeing this. It just bugs me. So I come here all the time to turn that off. That's an example of the type of view option that you have here. You may also choose to look at page breaks to see how it will print out, do some zooming. New window, you can freeze some of the cells so that they kind of stay in place. More advanced options that we'll hit at a later date. All right, I mentioned before rows and columns. I've been referring to it, but let's talk about what they actually are. The rows are the numerical values that you see on the left-hand side here, and they mark a record all the way from the top, which is row 1, to the very bottom, which is row 1,048,576. That's the default maximum for Excel, and I don't know where that comes from. Someone could probably answer that if they want in the chat here. I would appreciate it. That would be kind of interesting to know. So those are the rows, and that's how you reference the information going across the sheet, all the way from the first column, which is column A, all the way to the last column, which is column XFD. So it goes through the alphabet A through Z, as you can see all the way over here on the very far side of my screen. And then after Z, it goes to AA, and then AB, AC, etc., all the way out to XFD. So it can be pretty wide, can hold quite a bit of information. So I'm going to get back to where we were. Sorry to make you sick jumping around the page like this, but those are the rows. That's the information going across the sheet, and the columns are the information going down the sheet. The intersection of those two things is what's called a cell. So right now I have highlighted row 232 and column C. So the intersection of those two is the cell that is referenced as cell C232 or C232. So that's this cell right here, and I've written it out in a, just so you can kind of understand that. Okay, let's talk about a couple things just navigating around the worksheets. Number one is that you can scroll very similar to a web page. You can go up and down in the information by using the scroll wheel on your mouse. But a really powerful way to navigate around Excel is to use the arrows. Now, the arrows can be used in the common way where you are just going left, right, down, but they also can be used in a much quicker way, which is to hold the control button and then use the up, down, left, and right arrow to get all the way to the very end of content or the end of the open spaces. So since I'm on an open area where there's no information above me, no information below, hitting control up goes to the very top row, row 1, or control down goes all the way to the bottom row. If I were to hit control right, it jumps me out all the way to the very far right column, and control left brings me back. When I'm in a table, I've got a sample table here, it's not going to jump me all the way to the very last column, it's going to jump me to the last filled column. So if I hit control right from where I'm at, you'll see it jumped from B4 to P4. Similarly, going down, it will jump from B4 to B40 to the bottom of that content, or the bottom of this. If I hit it again, it does take me to the bottom of the record. So it becomes a really useful tool in getting around Excel without grabbing out to your mouse. This way you can navigate very quickly back and forth between really wide or long sets of data. So that's a really great pro tip to have. The mouse is also very useful in Excel as it's got a very point and click friendly operation. You know, selecting a group of cells is just a click and drag. Doing something like autofill, which we'll work on later, is to click and drag it. Selecting the cell that you're interested in changing is as simple as clicking on it and then starting to enter information. So that's some of your basic navigation. Now that you've got it, let's head back to the index and head on to our next topic. That was the interface and some familiarization with it. We're going to go do some basic spreadsheet actions. All right, we're going to do like the basics of opening a new file, creating a new one, and going to open a new workbook, save it. So we're in a file right now. In order to do some of these things, we're heading over to the File tab in the ribbon. And you'll see it looks really different. It does not behave like the other tabs where it just gives you more options. It jumps you out to a whole nother screen with a whole bunch of options. The very second option on the left-hand side there is New. So as you might imagine, this is where you come to open up a new Excel file. There we go. Now we've got a new blank workbook and a blank worksheet, worksheet 1. I don't need that, so I'm going to close it. But that is getting your file, your new file open. So let's talk about saving a workbook. I have the autosave option on in my quick access menu at the very top left. You can see that here. And so when I come to File, the options for me are still down here on the left-hand side, and the only option I have is to save a copy. That's because I had that autosave on. Autosave is a great step to take because it will keep all of the most recent actions you've taken, even if your system shuts down or something happens where you get closed out of the file. You're not going to lose your most recent work. If you were to have that off and came back to this file option, now you can do save or save as, but it's safest and a best practice to have autosave on. And then saving isn't really coming to the file and clicking save. It is just letting this run in the background. And if you really are feeling insecure or want to make sure you've captured a step you've just completed, you can hit this save button. And you'll see here it's working on it. It was saving. Now it says saved. So that is saving a workbook. But let's talk about opening a workbook. So this would be in the instance that you have a workbook, but it isn't presently open. You can come to File and choose Open. That will serve up some of your recent workbooks. You can go to some of your folders here, or you can come on the left-hand open menu and choose Browse, and that's going to jump you into File Explorer, where you can find wherever you had stashed this file. I'll also say that the search capability within a lot of the Microsoft tools is becoming far better. So if you were to have a file, and you could remember the beginning of the naming of it, you're probably going to be quicker accessing it by searching for it this way. So that's opening a file. So there you go. You open, you can save, and open a brand new one. Let's talk about entering data into cells. And so I've left a little opportunity over here for you to do that. And so I've got cell K24 here where I've kind of outlined here. I'd like you to enter something here. So there's a chance for you to practice. So you could practice something like entering text, or you could practice entering a number. So I've got this sort of fake example where we've entered a patient ID. So how I know what's in this cell is not just by looking at it, actually. By just looking at it, I see a number, but I'm going to show you quickly how I can actually create that number in another way. And it's not actually a number that's in this cell, but I can tell that it's a number in this cell because up here in the function sort of workspace, you can see that the actual number 15683 is in there as what's in the cell. If instead I was doing a common thing that we do in Excel, which is reference another cell, like I will do here in M25, I will put into this cell the equals sign, and then I'm going to click on K24 there. I'm going to hit enter, and so now you'll see that actually in M25 you have the exact same value as you do in K24. However, in K24 you have an actual number, but in M25, as you saw I entered, there's a formula instead. So that's an important thing to note, that even though it may be displaying something like a number, it might not be an actual number that's sitting in that cell. It may be a formula that's creating that number. So that's how we enter data into Excel, just by typing. You click into the cell that you care to and start typing away, and that way you'll have information in the cell. All right, let's talk about copy paste and undo redo. Now, there are always a couple different ways to do these things in Microsoft products. So the classics that you may know about would be to highlight information, right click it, choose copy, and then come to another space, right click that, and choose paste. That will do a copy and paste function for you. However, if you've worked in Microsoft for any time, you've probably gotten used to using Control-C and Control-V to do the same thing. That works in Excel too also, and it's very, very useful. So you're going to see here I choose the cells that I care to copy, I hit Control-C, I come to the area where I want it to end up and hit Control-V, and there we go. We've copy and pasted some information that is in these cells and brought it over to the next cells. Now, of note, other shortcuts in Microsoft also work, like Control-Z, which will be an undo of the last action that you had, or Control-Y, which will be a redo of the last action that you had. So those shortcuts are worth pointing out because they're really helpful in getting comfortable working around in Excel. All right, now I've got an example I want to show you to help you understand some of the autofill capabilities in Excel. Autofill is Excel trying to help you with overly manual tasks. One option I would have if I wanted to fill this in, numerically in order, would be to type 4 and then type 5, 6, 7, and continue that. But Excel, on common tasks like that, can predict what it is that you need to do. It does that through what they call autofill. So the way you access that on something like this, where I've started this list, 1, 2, and 3, I know that Excel can kind of predict what I'm doing next. So I'm going to grab the lower right-hand corner, which shows up as a tiny box there, and I'm going to drag that down. And you can see that Excel did a proper job of thinking for me, 1, 2, 3, 4 through 11. So that's very useful. It also becomes useful in the case where we're using formulas. So in the example here, I've written a simple formula to add these two together, and if I wanted to continue that formula through the rest of this column, I'd have to retype it every time with the new column that I want in there. So to get the answer properly for this next one, I would have to go equals to P49 plus P50. And so now I've got the formula here is what I want, here, and I'd have to retype that every time. It would be incredibly manual. And so autofill is a great way to have that cascade all the way down through the rest of my data. Here I'm just going to double click on that cell and it thinks for me and goes ahead and fills in that information all the way down. So that's your autofill capability, where Excel can help you with some really manual data entry tasks. All right, so let's head back to the index and think about what is our next topic. We've got one more detailed topic, then we'll talk about Excel in the healthcare context. So our next detailed topic is workbook and worksheet management. So here we're going to talk about some simple things like I want this worksheet named something different. You can see that my worksheets have names, and the way that I've done that is by renaming them. When you create a worksheet from scratch, it has a default name like sheet 1 or sheet 2. But by double clicking on the tab of that worksheet, you can rename it to anything that you want. This can also be done by right clicking on the tab and choosing rename. But it's a little bit quicker just to double click and start typing. So that's the basic renaming function that you have. I mentioned if you get a new sheet, it's labeled sheet A, sheet B, sheet 1, sheet 2, whatever it is. Here's how you create a new sheet, one of two ways. You can use the plus arrow here. You can see that it's created sheet 1. Or you can right click on any of the tabs and say insert and make a choice here of what to insert. Insert a worksheet. So it's going to do something very similar where it makes sort of a default name and just gives us a blank worksheet inserted right where I had chosen. Now I'm going to show you how to get rid of that worksheet. I did it quickly before, you may have already caught it, but by right clicking on that worksheet tab, the very second option is to delete. So getting rid of a worksheet can be done in that way. Now the way that you move sheets around within this order is pretty intuitive, but if you didn't know it right away, it might be frustrating to arrive at. It is just to click and drag. So I'm going to click and hold this reference tab and drag it over to where I want. So it's pretty straightforward. Click and drag those tabs in order to get them into the order that you want. So that is renaming, inserting, deleting, and moving. So one last thing I'll show you can do with tabs is hiding them and unhiding them. It might not be immediately clear to you why you would want to do this, but an example where this comes up regularly for me is when I have raw data sitting somewhere that I need to perform a function on, like taking the average or taking the sum. So on this worksheet called front end, I've got sort of front end visual information that I need to share with somebody where I'm just calculating the average of the billing amount in table 1, which is over here on this reference tab. This billing amount in the table I have to do some summary information of, or I might do a chart of, but I don't need my users to come here and see the raw, dirty data. And so one of the options I have is to hide that tab. By right-clicking on the tab and choosing hide, it is gone from view, gone and out of sight, out of mind, but it is not gone forever. It can be resurfaced. If you right-click any of the tabs and click unhide, you'll see that that one is available there, and as soon as I choose it, it will become visible again to be, manipulated, added to, whatever the case may be. So that's how you hide and unhide, and the reason you may want to do it. That's the end of this topic. Let's go back and hit one last thing. I just want to talk a little bit about the healthcare context and why Excel is still a tool worth learning and understanding. Even though there's now more advanced tools, the data sets are growing and it sometimes requires more advanced tools. Excel still shows up day to day for me and many colleagues for these reasons I've listed below. It's still very flexible and familiar to many, so it gives people the ability to quickly get working in a tool they know how to operate. There's also a very low barrier to entry. It's available to many, it's very cheap, and it's easy to navigate and work in. Also very accessible for small practices or small pieces of data, small groups that don't have a ton of big tools or a big budget. Those are the reasons that it sticks around. Let's just add a little bit of context to what you might start seeing as we talk about healthcare data in Excel, like these different healthcare data types. one common data type that will emerge in healthcare data is some sort of identifier to tell you what record belongs to which patient. In many institutions, that is referred to as the MRN, or the medical record number. Some other patient identifiers you may see would be their names, their birth dates, that type of information. Of course, this is protected health information, or PHI, and is something that should not be handled lightly or shared without a very strong reason and necessity to do so. Another term I want you to get comfortable with is the term of encounter. This represents one opportunity that you have to serve a patient. So in different settings, it can mean different things. In the clinic, it could be one 30-minute visit, but in the hospital, that could be multiple days serving the patient, getting them better. So it can have slightly different meanings depending on the setting, but it represents serving a patient one time to get them better. You'll also see information like lab results and billing and claims. So Excel is still really used because it has the ability to both store, organize, and present information. That's the other thing Excel does that honestly some of the more advanced tools kind of fall down at. It's worth mentioning though, a couple of the potential issues. There's times when Excel isn't the right tool. That's when the data volume becomes too big and Excel just can't process it. That will start happening as you see bigger and bigger data sets. And the other thing is when you cannot afford the manual entry errors. Because Excel can easily be overridden, like I've just done there, just for example, you don't want this if it's really important to have some strong integrity to your data. The last item would be if security and PHI is paramount, Excel is not exactly the most secure. If it needs to go outside your institution or be shared in some other way, Excel is not going to be a way that you can really do that in a secure and robust fashion. So that is when you have to start thinking of moving beyond Excel to other more advanced tools. You may have heard of things like a SQL database or BI tools like Tableau, Power BI. All right, that's video 1. I know we went through a lot. Hang in there, take a little time to practice, and go through this resource. And also, you've got this resource to come back to. You don't have to learn everything in a day. You've got this great resource to come back to once you hit a need and oh yes, I was taught that. It's sitting somewhere for me to see again. Thank you so much for joining.